Here I have my completed, well, almost completed little darling's dress. It's all machine sewn. If you followed along in my last two YouTube videos, you would have seen me make this up to this point. And now we have this lining on the inside that needs to be tacked down. What I do first is I like to get the lining just so it's coming down straight. I don't know if that makes any sense. I don't want it to skew on the inside. So I'll put a pin center front, sometimes on the shoulders, definitely coming down from the armholes. And then kind of diagonally on the two back sections, like that. And then we can turn it inside out. I use straw or milliner's needles. I like the really fine ones. These are size 11s. They are really fine. Let me show you my... They're really fine. And they can take a little bit of patience to thread. I'm sure you can go a little bit thicker. I just like these because they're long, and they're thinner, so they slide through the fabric very, very easily. I've tried some thicker ones, and it's just, well, you need a thimble then. It's just a lot more work to this. And I start with hand sewing this back center section down first. I have 2 needles all threaded, ready to go. There's about 24 inches of thread in each needle. And I slide the needle up underneath this back seam allowance, and I come out. You can see where I need to start stitching. Just pull out. And I'll get it about like this. So I just take little stitches, just little bits. I'm going to turn it this way. And when you get to the bottom, the waist area, don't go through. Don't go through to the gathers. Just kind of touch on the dressed seam allowance. So that it's still loose. And this can be tucked underneath, just like that. So by keeping this loose, you can still tuck under there. And then you can tack it down to the skirt. Take a couple of tiny stitches there. Okay, so that part's done. And then what I like to do is just go down with some straight pins, folding the bodice lining under. So it meets, when it's folded under, it meets the stitching, the machine stitching when you sewed the bodice to the skirt. So just, it's there. And at the same time, make sure the lining isn't getting skewed or twisted. Sometimes you could stick your nail into the lining where the thread line is. Just press down like that, and then you can see where to turn it under. It's usually it usually is about the 1/4 of an inch that it's supposed to be. And just work down. You can see here sometimes, this is why I left extra in the lining, why I angled the seam allowance and left extra in the center back, because there sometimes isn't quite enough here. But usually it can be fudged. It's usually pretty close. And if you need it, you can take more from this area. So for the back, just pin it with the raw edge showing. What we will do, or what I will do, is I will sew the lining down till I get to the second side seam. I'll leave the needle there, I won't end it, and then I will start a new needle and piece of thread and stitch this center back. And I will also then go down and do this part of the skirt that was left open. And then I'll come back and I will finish with my original first needle. I will finish sewing the waistline lining down. It just eliminates having to cut a lot of thread. So to stitch, what I do is I stitch as close to the machine stitching as possible, and that keeps the threads from wanting to show on the other side. You don't have to be as careful as if you were working down here. You can see it's going to show through. But But for some reason, when you work up here, right kind of along the machine stitching, it doesn't show through. It's just easier. So that's what I aim to do. You don't need to grab a lot of the skirt fabric at all. And every once in a while, kind of form the bodice as it will be when it's right side out. So make the curve like as it's going around the doll's body, pretend it is, and just give these little hand stitches, or just make sure that they're tight enough that the lining is secured and it's not puckering. Because as we're stitching this, we're going around the wrong way, opposite how it will be worn on the doll. That's just a little thing to make it look a lot nicer. Okay, I'm up to the second side seam, so I'm going to just put this needle in there in the dress just to leave it sit there. And I'm going to work on the other center back seam allowance. Now I'm going to go down and hand stitch the opening of the center back in the center back skirt. And I check the opposite side a lot when I do this because the thread, the needle likes to come out the opposite side easily. And then you just have to rip it out. So it's easier to check it. See how that? No. And when I get to the bottom here, I just do a couple little tiny tacks across, because when you're dressing the doll, this is going to be stressed. And so this helps the lining be a little bit tougher to those stresses. I don't know if you can see like the little tacks I took across. Okay, and I knot this here, but don't cut it because you will hopefully have enough thread left and you can start to sew on the snaps with this thread. So just knot it though, and just leave it here. Now let's go back and finish this part of the facing. Going to add some more pins here. In this back area where there's not as many gathers, I turn it over to make sure I'm not going through, because I've done that before. Then you see these little white threads there. Okay, so I'll just knot this. And the facing is all beautifully, neatly tacked down. Dress is fully lined. Next thing I do is sew on the snaps. I only need 2 sets for this, one at the top and one at the waistline. See, the edge will be about here. It's about 3/8. Make sure you have the waistline seams line up so it doesn't end up like this or like this. And I have a straight pin here with a snap inserted in the center. And I do that so that I know how far away to get the pin from the edge and the seam line and the waistline seam line, so that the snap isn't like going off the edge like that. It's about to there, and I just stick it straight in. And that's where the waistline snap will go, which is the one I do first. I think this might be over a little too far. I think I want to get it closer to the edge. Think about like that. Okay. So this is a little tricky. This top one will be for the top snap, so that's already in the right place. But we need to stick a pin in for the bottom snap. So I will just wiggle this pin around so it makes a little hole in the fabric, it'll separate the threads. I won't make a real hole, just separates the threads so that I can see, right there, I can see it. Can you see it? So I'll just stick that in, wiggle around again, but it needs to come up from the bottom. So there. And then what this pin does, get my snaps out. I always test my snaps first because I've had them where they wouldn't work. I test them out. Make sure the set works. So this is the bottom one that I do first. And I'll use the straight pin and stick it in the center of the snap. And it's ready to go. It's in the perfect spot. And for the other side, so it doesn't fall out, just kind of do that. Just stick it down into the dress. Okay. So we still have this thread. And I sew these on with a double strand, so I move I just make the strand longer. I make the cut half of it longer than the other part of it, so that this is hard to explain. So when I take a stitch towards where the snap will be, there's this loose end here, and then the rest of it is double. And I can take another little stitch there, and then it's ready to start sewing the snaps. And then you can just cut that off. I hate starting new threads, so if there's a way to make this easier, I do it. Okay. Let's thread this back on. And I leave this center straight pin in with the snap until I get to the third hole, because it can move around. And I hate when my thread loops around the back here, so I'll just keep my finger on it because that'll keep the thread from looping when you're pulling from the bottom. I don't like the way this is working, so I'm going to have to cut this. Don't like the way I don't like the way that is sewing on the back. It's not neat. So I just cut my thread at the needle, and now I pulled it out, and now I'm going to have to thread both strands through. There, first set's done. And again, you want to get the edges even, so the top, so you don't want this or this. And if I can, I like to hide my knot from this thread, the new thread, because you do need new thread to do the second set of snaps. If I can hide it up in between the lining and the top fabric, I do. Then this one can be knotted off. Now for this one, this strand you can leave to sew on the buttons. They will go on this side. So if it's long enough, you only need one strand though. So I just cut one strand from the snap, or sewing on the snap. Just have one strand on the needle. You can bring the needle back to the right side, about where the little button will go. I think I'm going to do 3 little buttons in red. Don't need to be sewn on securely because they're not being used as buttons, they're just decorative. So I just go through each button twice. I don't like this button. It has some of that, the mold from the molds, it's kind of picky. This one's a little bit better. Sometimes I use little beads too.